Welcome to our session on sustained economic growth. Now, as you may recall, we originally talked about 4 questions that we were trying to find the answers to. One of those was what causes inflation, one was what causes unemployment, one was what causes business cycles or recessions, and the most important one I told you was what causes sustained economic growth. Now, sustained economic growth is different than just economic growth because what it implies is that this growth is going to be sustained over a long period of time. And in the case of the United States, we have seen pretty much a 2 to 3% growth rate that has occurred over the last 200 years. If you start adding this together, you very quickly see that this is nonlinear. And so as you can see on the graph that I've got up on the screen, that the GDP or economic growth of the world was flat for about 10,000 years. And then something changed. And once that thing changed, whatever it was, about 200 years ago, in the late 1700s in Europe, in the early 1800s in the United States, things suddenly took off. And since then, we've seen this nonlinear increase in GDP or wealth that's been generated. Now, we have to be very careful because we need to understand what caused this and be able to see if we can apply it to other nations. If we can make everybody rich, then we can have our goal of world peace. The first question that we have to think about is just how rich are we? So if we apply that same concept with the consumer price index to the inflation that's occurred and look at individual wealth, we find that most people agree that John Rockefeller, who founded Standard Oil, was the richest American who ever lived. Today, they estimate that his wealth in today's dollars would be about $400 billion, or in other words, about 4 times that of Bill Gates and people of his ilk. But how rich really was John D. Rockefeller? If he was so rich, would you be willing to trade places with him? Would you be willing to go back into his day and be wealthy like John Rockefeller was? Or would you prefer to be living the life you live now? Let me just remind you of a few things. If you go back into John Rockefeller's day, you have to recognize that life expectancy at that time was about 40 years. Now, obviously, people lived longer, but on the average, people lived about 40 years. There was no television, no internet, no email, no air conditioning, no cars, no airplanes, no telephones, no antibiotics. Just think about dentistry and what it was like at that time. The question is, how rich really was John Rockefeller with all of his wealth? He was unable to buy any of those things that you're able to buy. And so the question is, would you be willing to trade places with him and go back knowing that you can't have any of those things? Or would you prefer to live like you live today? And what do you think John Rockefeller would do if he had the opportunity to trade his billions for all the things that I've just described? I put it to you that you are richer than John Rockefeller, the richest American who ever lived. And so thinking about it from that standpoint, just how rich you really are, then we have to ask ourselves, why did we get to be so rich? Now, there's a number of different models that we can look at. And one of those models is the Robinson Crusoe model of productivity. This has to do with the idea that individuals will come up with new forms of capital to help them produce goods and services. So in the case of Robinson Crusoe, that would be the net, the fishing pole, so forth. But that's not enough. People have had that ability for thousands of years. So what is it that would really drive this kind of economic growth? Well, let's consider what the 5 elements of productivity are. And to do that, we're going to look at the production function, which I'll introduce in a minute. But the elements of that are going to be physical labor, physical capital, such as machines and tools and so forth, human capital, which is education and skilled work, natural resources that we use to put things together, and finally, technology or innovation. So those are the 5 inputs into production. And the production function looks like this. Now recognize that we don't know what that function actually looks like. And so the way we write it is Y, or income, this would be GDP, is equal to, and then we have the letter A, which in this case represents technology. Technology times some function. Again, we don't know the form of that function. That includes labor, capital, human capital, and natural resources. L for labor, K for capital, H for human capital, and N for natural resources. If we then divide all of those by total population, we get the individual function, which would be a lowercase y. This would be your function. Y equals technology times some function of labor, capital, human capital, and natural resources. And so we tend to look at things from that standpoint. The other thing we want to consider is the impact of public policy on growth. And that could include policies that would encourage savings and investment, policies that might reduce transaction costs, policies that might create network effects, education levels, protect property rights,